Warning: the following video contains stories and tales of the paranormal. I highly recommend that you click off now, as it's your only option. Viewer discretion is definitely advised. However, for the rest of you, sit back, relax, turn the lights down, and prepare to be scared. This is one more paranormal story from my past. When I was younger, I've always been exposed to shows that really did scare the shit out of me, and I can't tell you if this was simply the product of an overactive imagination, because when I was younger I suffered from fucking night terrors, and I had to take medication for it because I couldn't get the fucking idea of ghosts and, you may be cringing now, but zombies out of my mind. I actually had to see a doctor, and I was prescribed pills. And a lot of those pills made me feel uncomfortable, sick to my stomach, and I've even hallucinated before, so take each of these stories with a grain of salt, because you may not believe in ghosts. However, there are explanations that may be supporting the sightings of ghosts. For example, electromagnetic fields can cause the mind to hallucinate, and if you're hallucinating and you're feeling incredibly uncomfortable, you can oftentimes imagine ghostly apparitions. However, there's also evidence to support that ghosts, demons, or spirits might actually do exist in some form. And there's even a field of study called paranormal investigation. So again, whether you choose to believe this is a hallucination or not, just please sit back and enjoy the story. When I was younger, I actually had to go see a doctor about my constant nightmares. I would wake up almost every night screaming, and my older brother, who was in the bunk bed above me, would wake up and get my parents. My parents would come in, console me, and let me sleep in their room on a sleeping bag on the floor. Every night would be a struggle to get to sleep. I would stay up for hours on end, sometimes up to 3 to 4 in the morning, just trying to sleep before school starts. Now, I shouldn't mention at the time I was in maybe the 3rd grade, and it was simply because I played a lot of video games and watched a lot of movies that just simply scared the shit out of me. And when I mean a lot of movies, I mean Time Splitters and that Darkness Fall movies. I only saw the beginning, and seeing that mother get killed and dragged away really did scare me as a kid. But that doesn't matter. What really does matter is that I was forced to take a lot of medications. I took Ritalin and several other experimental drugs that I still can't remember to this day, and my parents don't really remember a lot of it either. All I knew is that I had to take them and they would help me sleep at night. And for a while they did, and I would take them at school so again I could sleep properly, because one of the side effects of the medication was a lack of REM sleep, meaning I didn't really go into the dream state. I just kind of lost track of time and laid down, which led me to falling asleep a lot in class, or rather simply staying up for such a long period of time that I would hallucinate. Well, there was this one drug that I remember that, well, took me into a weird place, a weird state of suspension. I can't remember the name of the drug, but I should also mention that it was also the same time when I started playing around with a Ouija board, or Ouija board. I don't really know how to pronounce it, so please forgive me, but I'll be going with the Ouija pronunciation from now on. So with that being said, let's continue. Anyway, I had this drug that I would take every day, and it would cause me to space out at random occasions. I would black out for hours on end. And it did scare my mom at some point, just to see me sitting there on the couch, not particularly staring at anything, the TV off, and I was in a slightly darkened room, again, just sitting there staring. It was also around this time when I started playing with the Ouija board, and I would oftentimes do it by myself while my brother was away at camp in the summer. Now, he would leave the room, and it would basically give me 2 bunk beds to myself, and oftentimes if I was quiet enough, I could get away with doing it. Now, I should mention that my mom was also very paranormally tuned. When she was younger, or rather when she just had me as a kid, she played with a Ouija board as well, and she got some really fucking disturbing results. It first started off with her and her friends playing. They made their own Ouija board and then got a Cedar Point glass cup in order to actually, again, play the game. They used the glass cup as a planchette and simply played. At first, they got nice responses. My mom was trying to contact her grandmother, and the spirit pretended to be her grandmother for a long time. They asked her questions like how old she was when she died, were their last thoughts peaceful, and things like that. And they would get weird, disturbing responses, such as, "What year did you die?" And she would respond with something like 1982 death, which didn't make sense because my mom's grandmother died in 1993. On top of that, the planchette, after a long time of getting these weird and random responses, would start moving in erratic ways. For example, when they first started playing, the planchette would go over the words and letters just like that, just sliding over directly to them. However, as the game went on, the planchette started moving in circles and figure eights until eventually they would land on their mark. Eventually, the planchette started spelling out things like, "Fuck you, you're a horrible bitch, go fucking die," followed by, "You're going to get into a car crash at the end of the year, and your son's gonna be retarded." That's when the planchette started moving violently across the board, and then was thrown against the wall, glass shards shattering everywhere. It was at that point that my mother and her friends simply decided that it wasn't worth it, and they decided to burn the paper board. Then they took the ashes along with the glass shards and simply threw them away outside. And they actually left the fucking glass outside in the garbage bin that was set to be taken out to the trash the next morning. When my mom woke up, the fucking glass itself that was shattered was no longer shattered. In fact, it was sitting on her porch completely all together, upside down, like the planchette originally was, with the paper board that was burned the night before up. And when you live in an apartment with little to no glasses, you know what glasses are broken and what aren't. And the only glass that we actually had was that Cedar Point glass, and there was only one Cedar Point glass in the whole house. Ever since then, my mother has vowed not to fucking touch anything along those lines ever again. And when I was born with Asperger's and pervasive development disorder, which is a non-specific area of autism, but it also can be considered a form of mental retardation, which really does affect my ability to understand the times tables, or rather, simply process them fast enough. However, with that being said, I decided to do it without knowing the story. And here's my experience with the Ouija board. It was a long and lonely night. I want to let you know that when I was a kid, I got grounded a fuck ton, and this was like no other. Apparently, I found a knife at my cousin's house, and I went around claiming how I wanted it, and I wanted to keep it so I could stab people. I honestly don't have any recollection of this, but according to my cousin and my cousin's dad, I really was violently wanting to keep this. I would yell at people in their house saying that I needed this knife, even though I found it randomly in the couch. Then they kept on saying that I was the one who brought the knife, and again, I've never seen a knife like that ever before, and I did find it in the couch. Eventually, I did come to my senses, and I broke out crying, saying that, again, it wasn't mine, and this and that, but this did leave me to be grounded and confined to my room all day. My older brother was at summer camp, and at this time, the only thing I had to entertain myself was whatever was on basic television, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and among other shows. But I also had an Xbox original. Now that was some fun times. However, after playing the Xbox original offline for about, 6 hours, and then watching TV for the other 6 hours, and finding out that my mom and my dad are going to be going out drinking for the entire night, I decided to pull out my Ouija board, feeling that it was safe enough because my mom has told me that I was never to fucking play around with anything like this ever at all. Like, she would really instill it into me that if I ever brought one into house, she would backhand me. Anyway, I got the Ouija board, and I pulled out a makeshift planchette. This time, it was a shot glass taken from the hutch downstairs. As I started to play with the board, I simply asked it questions, and at first, I got nothing in response. And I really do mean nothing. I would sit there for hours on end with the TV playing cartoons in the background, trying to ask questions like, is anyone there? Are there any spirits? Do zombies exist? I actually do remember that one. But eventually, I remember blacking out and then waking up in my basement. The TV was turned off. Well, it probably was. I couldn't hear it anymore, and the walls are very thin. And on top of that, I was alone in a fucking desk chair taken from the living room where my dad kept his office. One thing you should know about blacking out is that it feels like you're blinking almost. You remember shutting your eyes, not being particularly tired, and then just waking up in a strange, weird place. Places that you don't remember being. You oftentimes wake up confused, looking around you like, what the fuck? I was just sitting down, nothing really. But no, I blacked out, and I was in my basement. Now, one thing you should understand about my basement is that there were no windows down there, period. The door was shut and locked, and I was alone, sitting at this chair, with nothing but a paper board and a shot glass, and a weird knee-high table in front of me. So, being scared out of my wits, and simply not having anything else to do in the basement, again, the door was locked as I checked several times, and there was nothing in the basement except for a carpet, a few cubbies in which we kept old wires and cables, and a blinking light that ran off of fluorescent tubes. There was, again, carpet, and it was warm down there. However, there was nothing but this table and this chair that I seemingly dragged down in my blacked out state. So, once again, I asked, was anyone there? And that's when I got a response. The first response was weird, to say the least. I got a simple yes, and then the letter J. I don't know why it was just the letter J, but I actually got a response, and I can attest that even in my own drugged up state, I was not moving my hands on my own. And now, some people have an explanation for this where it's simple muscle memory, and that might explain the weird J, but it gets weirder as time goes on. I continue to ask, what does J mean? And on top of that, who is here? I got a very chilling response to that, and I still to this day don't quite understand. First off, the letter J, according to the spirit, meant jackal, and its name was, well, according to it, Jake. I continued to ask, hello Jake, are you dead? Am I alone right now, or am I just going insane? I know I was an 8-year-old kid, but I was kind of obsessed with death. It was actually one of my things that I did all the time. I would obsess with death, and my teachers would always write back to my mom about how I would keep on writing and fixating on my grandfather's death. My great-grandpa George was a very inspirational person in my life, and when he died, I was distraught. I couldn't stop talking about it. I could not stop writing about it. Every journal in my journal was about him, his funeral, and how he used to live. And it did scare my teachers. There was even this one incident where I'd go into class and I would tell them on show and tell day that my entire family died in a car crash, and I came here on the bus because my mom couldn't drive me because she couldn't talk no more. That prompted them to call my parents, and of course they were not dead, but it's one of those weird quirks that I had as a kid. I was kind of a goth before I even knew what a goth was, and now I'm not. I'm just a guy who reads creepypastas on the internet, but it was something that was deeply a part of my childhood. Anyway, however, it then responded with, again, another weird and odd response. This time, it simply pointed the thing at Z, but then the rest of it actually spelled coherent words. This one coherent word that I could actually make out because I had a pen and paper next to me that I would write everything down on while I put my other hand on a planchette and allowed it to move. It actually wrote down, "No, you're not insane. However, I might be. I'm alone. You're not alone, but I am." That was, again, weird to me. So I asked it, how could you be alone? And how could you be alone if I'm, again, not alone? Because you're here with me. It responded with, "You're not alone. There's something there." And then it followed up with the letter O. I started asking, why is it adding random letters to the end of each fucking sentence or stuff like that? And then it responded with, "I'm sorry, that's not me." And then it ended with another Z. Oh, then followed up with, "What do you mean that's not you? Aren't you the one moving the planchette?" That's when it followed me up with a chilling response of, "Jackal's not here anymore." And then it finished by writing the letter O. The planchette at this point begun to move in figure eights, going around and around in a figure eight pattern. I don't know why or how it did this, but it just kept on moving back from Z to O in a figure eight, moving all the way around the board, stopping at Z, and then going around the board in the other way, and then stopping at O, over and over again. I started to feel unnerved. The sound of the wood being, well, the sound of the glass and the wood pressing against each other, almost indenting itself onto the wood, started to create this weird atmospheric thing that even me as a kid started to pick up on as dark and unnerving. I then proceeded to ask it, what is Zozo? Or Zaza? I don't even know how to pronounce it. And that's when I got an actual response, and this time it started using words that at the time I did not quite understand, but having the paper in front of me now and being able to read it really does make it a lot easier to understand. It simply said, "In the proverbial form, I don't need to make reference to you. You need to understand that I'm here and that you're gonna die. Death is a natural part of life. However, it can be hastened if one wants it. Do you want it?" The thing kept on moving back from Z to O, Z to O, Z to O, and that's when I started getting... At the time, I was scared shitless. I didn't know what to do, so at the time, I did the only thing I knew how to do, and I ran away from the board. And I tried to go upstairs, but once again, the door was locked. I couldn't get out. The subtle jingling of the fucking thing, I didn't know what to do. But, however, as time went by, I noticed that the fucking chair from downstairs was actually being moved in an erratic way. It would actually kind of move to the right corner of the room, the left corner of the room, and then down over to the stairs, as if inviting me back into the chair. But then, as I started walking down, it went back to its original place. Being scared shitless, I simply sat down and I figured that I'd play along for a little bit. Even as an 8-year-old, I was kind of aware of these tropes, and I figured that if I simply played along, perhaps I could get him to unlock the door somehow. So I sat back down and I said no. The thing went back from Z to O, Z to O, Z to O, Z to O, then responded with, "Then I guess you want one of your family members to die." I once again said, "No, I don't." And then it simply wrote down the word David. And that's when I blacked out. When I woke up again, I was in my room. And it was about, I would have to say, maybe 11 or midnight. Because I remember seeing the weird opening to Adult Swim and Cartoon Network. I wasn't very good on reading time. I couldn't read. I didn't know what numbers were. But one thing I did know was that Adult Swim meant 11 because it did kind of scare the fuck out of me. That opening intro, the duh with the black background and white text, it scared the shit out of me. Sitting in my room, I tried to think about what happened and what the fuck's going on, and then I remembered I wasn't supposed to have that fucking thing. So I went downstairs and I couldn't find the board. All I found was the paper that I wrote all this shit down on, and I actually still do have it. However, the shot glass I used was broken, and I needed to hide that shit. My mom and my dad were not very good together, and oftentimes they would yell at each other. But if I fucked up, they would yell at me 10 times as hard as they've ever yelled at each other. I'd also probably get a spank on my ass from my dad. So I quickly got a sweeper, and I started sweeping up all the glass from the carpet and got them into a dustpan, or at least everything that I thought it was. And once that was over, and I hid the paper under my bed, I tried to forget about it and I went to bed. The next day I learned that my Uncle David was actually in the hospital due to a drunk driving accident. My Uncle David was always a drunk, yes, and he's always had issues with alcohol, but I never really expected him to fall into some sort of trap like this. It reminded me that I don't know. I kept on focusing on it for the entire next day at school. But that wasn't even the worst of it. My dad cut his foot, and after about 2 weeks, we learned that the glass that, again, I tried to sweep up, cut into his foot and got stuck in his foot and caused an infection, which caused him to actually have to take out a knife, cut out the glass, and then see a doctor about the actual infection, and he had to get antibiotics. Of course, I claimed to have no recollection of anything, but apparently, I talked to my parents recently, and they were having weird issues outside. Oftentimes, they would see people in the back of our yard, but as soon as they went back to our yard, there would be no one there. And then finally, our neighbor started acting very strange. For example, there was one time where my mom was mowing the grass outside, and this house was in the back of the woods, and we had a lot of property. So mowing the grass was a long and arduous task. However, she would notice that our neighbor was sitting on his roof with a pair of binoculars, wearing all black pants and a black windbreaker with the hood pulled up, with black binoculars and some sort of black bandana covering his face. He would sit there and watch my mom for hours from the comfort of his own roof. One time, we actually brought a stepladder outside, and we found that it was missing the next day. So, of course, my dad thought that it was a creeper, again, creeping on my mom. And little did he know, it actually was. When my dad went to go confront him, he opened the door, and he found that the stepladder was set up in his living room. Now, one thing you should know about his living room is that it was barely head high. If you were 6 inches, you were almost touching the ceiling of the roof. It was only maybe another foot or so above your head, give or take. So you're 6 foot tall, you walk in, and you only have about a foot of room. Now, you got a stepladder in the middle of the fucking living room when you could touch it with your hand. He apologized and gave the ladder back. However, we found other weird things going missing around our yard, including our toys and things like that. My dad would confront him again, only to be confronted by a man holding a large knife. My dad said that it wasn't worth it and left. About a month later, we moved out, and we moved to a place called Commerce. And I haven't had any issues since, but I really recommend not fucking with Ouija boards. They're very strange and fickle things. Now, I know a lot of people can actually contact spirits of long dead relatives who need some closure passing. However, when you invite a spirit into your house, or invite a spirit or anything, you may get something that you weren't expecting. whether it's Zozo or just something that was more malevolent in nature. For example, if a person died tragically, and let's say this person was a teenager, and he died because of a drug overdose because he tried to kill himself, there's a likely chance that his ghost may be still lingering around because he had some unfixed feelings and he simply can't move on. However, then there's another issue that may come about from this. If you're a psychotic, say, serial killer, and then you blow your head off, when you're still if you're unrestful, you're still gonna be a genuinely bad person, and those feelings of anger, hate, and this lust to kill people will still be there. And if you had the chance to talk to someone, you'd probably fuck with them too. Even if you don't encounter Zozo, there's a good chance that you may encounter something, because no ghost or spirit or whatever stays behind because they had a good life. They're there because they don't have any choice. And that may make some people aware that the risk of encountering something bad is pretty high. So I recommend that you don't use a Ouija board, and this has been one real life experience from your host TCR. I'm actually shaking because I don't really like talking about these things because I'm a little afraid that people might think I'm kind of crazy. But, you know, I figured that you guys might like a nice scary story. And as I said, in the past, I was a fucking druggie. You know, maybe I heard my mom come home and I maybe passively heard her talk about my Uncle David's crash, and I simply learned about it the next day and hallucinated that it happened during the day. I was on 5 different kinds of medications, and one of those medications caused me to sit cross-legged staring at a wall in a pitch black room. I also was obsessed with death. So, again, take everything you hear in the story with a grain of salt. With that being said, I'm your host, That Creepy Reading, signing off.